Is an interpretive religion. We know this. By the 6th century, our sages taught that when a scribe writes a Torah scroll, every letter must be independent of every other letter. Makul gvil. If there is not white space all around every single letter, then the Torah scroll is pasul and may not be used for ritual public readings until it is corrected. Why is it so important that no letter be attached to any other? Because we don't only read the black letters. We also read the white spaces around the letters. That is where the interpretive wisdom resides. We apply this interpretive approach not only to our Torah study, but also to our calendar. We interpret our holy days. We interpret our heroes. We recreate them in the image of our own time so that they are forever relevant, so we can see our own story in the stories of our ancestors, and so that old narratives can cast new light in our own time. One of the most dramatic examples of this interpretive tradition is how we tell and retell the story of Hanukkah. We spin the Hanukkah story in more ways than we can spin at the dreidel. Mi Yamalel, we sing. Who can retell? We can. The Hanukkah story is retold and recast in every generation. It's what we do. It's what we do best. So let's consider today, briefly, 6 authentic versions of the Hanukkah story. 6 miracles, 6 warnings, 6 responsibilities. And I'll give you the punchline right up front. They are all true. Because in our interpretive tradition, truths may be found everywhere, especially in stories. First, the 4 books of Maccabees are found in the Apocrypha, originally written in Hebrew by a Jewish author, but never included in part of the Hebrew canon. The original Hebrew has been lost to us, but thank goodness the Greek translations remain. The books of Maccabees are included in the Catholic Bible and Orthodox versions of the Christian Bible. Most scholars agree that it was written very close to the period of the Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE. So how do they tell the story? When the memory was still clear in their minds, when the first-hand accounts were still being told by grandparents to grandchildren. According to the first book of Maccabees, the miracle was the return to Jewish national sovereignty in the land of Israel, the return to Jewish political freedom to self-govern, and the restoration of Jewish legal power to self-rule. There it is written, early in the morning, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up and offered sacrifices as the law directs on the new altar of burnt offering that they had built for themselves. They rededicated it and celebrated the dedication, the Hanukkah of the altar, for 8 days. This was a day of national independence. According to the books of Maccabees, the miracle of Hanukkah was reclaiming the Jewish right to self-rule, a triumph, not so unlike the story unfolding now for Ukraine, with all the world watching, the hard-won efforts of retaining the dignity of one's borders and one's national identity. This is the Zionist retelling of Hanukkah, evidence that the Jewish people needs a Jewish state. Second, Josephus was a Jewish journalist who wrote extensively about the end of the Second Temple in the 1st century of the Common Era. When Jerusalem was destroyed, he fled to Rome, became a citizen of Rome and a historian. In his book entitled Antiquities of the Jews, he wrote about Hanukkah, which was already by then ancient history. You'll hear some of the same themes from the books of Maccabees, but the emphasis has shifted now. from national independence to religious freedom. Josephus writes, "Now Judah celebrated the festival of the restoration of the religious sacrifices in the temple for 8 days. They were so very glad for the revival of their religious customs, when after such a long intermission they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship, that they had made it a law for their posterity, that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship practices for 8 days." The message here is to protect religious freedoms for your own people and for all peoples. The third telling: Jewish life in Judea was torture under Roman rule. The rabbis were fearful that the story of the Maccabean uprising would encourage the people of their own time to revolt against Rome. Because they knew that this would be the end of Jewish life, they knew that any revolt would be crushed under the power of Rome. The rabbis downplayed the Hanukkah story. In fact, there is no Talmudic tractate devoted to Hanukkah at all. The only glimpses we get are found in the tractate on Shabbat, when candle lighting is discussed. So how did the Talmudic sages retell the Hanukkah story to shift the focus from a military resistance? They introduced a new kind of miracle, an otherworldly kind of miracle. The Gemara asks, "My Chanukah, what is Chanukah?" When the Assyrian Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were there. And when the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from that oil, for 8 days. This is the origin of the miracle of the oil that lasted for 8 days. To protect their people from fantasies of driving out the great and mighty Roman Empire from the land of Israel, the rabbis shift the focus away from the military victory that was won by human hands, and they shine a light instead, a limelight, on the miracle that was brought by God's hands. And later they assign these words for next week's Haftarah: "Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im beruchi," not by might, not by human might, not by human power, but by God's Spirit alone. And the message here is clear: be on the lookout for miracles. They are everywhere, if only we open our eyes. Fourth, by the time we get to the 9th century, when Jews are scattered throughout the diaspora, a return to Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel was so far out of reach, the idea only existed in our prayers. The focus of the day was how to get through a rough world, how to get by, how to hold on to the good, how to believe that good can win out over evil. That is how the Hanukkah story is retold by Amram Gaon, the head of the Surah Academy of Babylonia, who compiled the first authoritative prayer book to unite the Jewish communities scattered throughout the lands. It was another very different take. This time, not a story of national sovereignty, not a story of religious freedom, not a story of the supernatural God-given miracles, but a story about good winning out over evil. Avram's liturgy is found in our own prayer books today. You know it well. Al Hanisim. We thank you for the miraculous deeds and for the redemption and for the mighty deeds and the saving acts wrought by you, O God. And then he goes on to say, in your abundant mercy, you, O God, rose up for them in the time of their trouble, and you pled their cause, and you executed judgment, and you avenged the wrong, And you delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, and you delivered the many into the hands of the few. And you delivered the impure into the hands of the pure, and the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the insolent ones into the hands of those occupied with your law, your Torah. This is a story of moral triumph, of all good people rising up to win out over evil. It is a story that teaches us to have trust that good will in the end prevail. Fifth, I'm going to fast forward to today. This is how I think the Hanukkah story is being told most often at this moment in North America. What is the current spin? With the frightful rise of anti-Semitism, most of what I'm reading about and hearing about is the story of having pride in our minority identity in the face of hatred. The Jewish press and even the general press are flooded daily with stories of placing your Chanukiah in the window without fear. My Facebook feed is filled with personal stories. My sorority sisters from college sharing stories of how they worry about their kids on campus wearing kippot or even ugly Hanukkah sweaters, wearing a Magen David or a chai, some expression, outward expression of their Jewish pride, how we worry about them. In the last number of months, you may have noticed that I have not spoken once from this bima about Kanye or Kyrie or the former US president who hosts Holocaust deniers and known anti-Semites and who tweets words like, Jews have to get their act together before it is too late. I haven't spoken about these things not because I'm not disgusted by them, but rather because I do not want to desecrate Shabbat with such ugliness. And I don't want to give any haters any airtime in our sanctuary. And also, frankly, because I don't find it very inspiring. This message is not particularly interesting to me. We don't learn anything new from the haters. It's literally one of the oldest stories in the book. That's not to say I don't care. That's not to say I don't lose sleep over it. I do, of course. The day after the Colleyville threat in Texas, when a rabbi and others were held at gunpoint, I was the one who called on UJA leadership and said, we need training in synagogues across the GTA. And I have been on municipal and provincial and national roundtables and consulting tables to help our elected leaders to combat anti-Semitism wherever it lurks. And I take that role very seriously. So yes, wear your Jewish stripes proudly, and yes, put your Chanukiah in the window proudly. Let all the world see, let even your neighbors see. Sometimes that's even more important than all the world seeing. There is a cynical view that a little anti-Semitism is good for the Jews. Not enough that anyone should get hurt, of course, but just enough to remind us that we are other, that we are distinct, that we have a distinct story, a distinct mission, a distinct purpose. I don't like this cynical view, even though I see its merit historically. So let those candles glow when anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head in so many strange directions. Finally, a sixth Hanukkah story. And this one is less dramatic, but even more powerful. It doesn't make the headlines, but I wanted to make the headlines here. Hanukkah means dedication and education. Let this be the season, let this be the year when we rededicate ourselves to our children and our grandchildren to ensure that they have the gifts of confidence in knowing who they are, knowing where they come from, knowing what they believe, knowing what they stand for, knowing what they can do, knowing what they ought to do. This year will be my 20th anniversary with Holy Blossom Temple, and the centerpiece of our celebrations will be shining a light on youth education for Holy Blossom Temple and all those who will join us. This is the most powerful stuff. Jewish tradition says the world is sustained by the breath of children, and teachers are our greatest heroes, and parents are the most influential teachers of all. So let us join our educational team of rabbis and cantors and educators and teachers and tutors, and let us make this our shared mission. Mi yamalel, who can retell? We can. We do. These are just 6 of the ways we tell and retell the Hanukkah story, and there is truth in them all. There is wisdom and instruction in them all. Let there be the light of national independence. Let there be the light of religious freedoms. Let there be the light of God-given miracles. Let there be the light of triumph of good over evil. Let there be the light of pride in one's identity, even in the fear of hatred. And let there be the light of Torah and lifelong learning. When we light our candles, let's delight in all of these truths, and let us be ignited by them. Amen.